live stream here on YouTube on Thursday, the 2nd of April, 2026. My talk is about BBC Local Radio News and Current Affairs TV Studios Part 3 and the final one in the series of 3. Tonight, I'd like to discuss the route the signal from each one-camera NCA TV studio takes to the transmitters as used for a sub-region opt-out. There was only 2 or 3 BBC Local Radio NCA studios that could opt out from a main transmitter directly. The rest of the NCA studios were just used as contribution studios to regional news programmes on both the BBC and ITV. ITV, by courtesy of the BT PLC network switching centres that can route lines, contribution lines between BBC studios and ITV studios when necessary. I'm using the former News and Current Affairs TV studio installation at BBC Radio Cumbria's former Hilltop Heights premises in Carlisle, as seen in August 1988 as an example. BBC Radio Cumbria was based on the top floor of that building. Well, back in the late 1980s and for some years afterwards, there was an analogue television picture together with audio from the studio's microphones that was firstly combined together in the studio's electronic processing equipment to produce a sound in sync signal. That's where you had a sound signal embedded in the synchronizing pulses of the television signal from the camera of the studio. This meant that the audio signal was contained in the phase alternating line television synchronization pulses produced in the NCA TV studio's remotely controlled TV camera and then routed from the central apparatus room, known by some local radio staff as the rack room. This contained line transmission and terminating equipment for the various outgoing and incoming sound circuits for the radio station studios, together with vision circuits for the TV studio. There was more than one sound in sync television circuit from Radio Cumbria's central apparatus room. The second sound in sync circuit was known as a protection circuit and would swing into action if the usual circuit was logically or physically cut, or there was some other fault with the line. It's known as a protection circuit, and they're used elsewhere at British Telecommunications PLC if there's a sensitive line, either a voice grade line or a data line that needs to have an alternative route and an alternative line. They build in a protection circuit connecting the premises concerned to the relevant nearest BT premises, etc. Protection circuits were also used by the radio station's so-called music lines. These are analog lines having an audio bandwidth of 50 Hz to 15 kHz inclusive. The term music line was a slang term used by some of the station's local radio staff. However, the BT PLC lease lines to the radio station's VHF band 2 transmitter were digital and used a form of pulse code modulation. As the mode of transmission. There was a digital to analog converter at each of their VHF FM sites, along with other signal processing equipment. The medium wave transmitters were connected to Radio Cumbria using analog lines known as wire pairs, as the medium wave transmitters only had a bandwidth of 9 kHz, so were of lower quality than the VHF transmitter sites due to their narrower bandwidth. However, I digress. Getting back to television, the main television sound in sync circuit together with the protection circuit was routed through the BT PLC, that's British Telecommunications PLC, Carlisle Network Switching Centre, which the on-duty News Northwest Cumbria newscaster had to contact by telephone in order to get clearance that's arming the opt-out switch to opt out from BBC One Northwest Colbeck transmitter. When clearance was granted, the on-duty newscaster could then operate the opt-out switch in order to put the Cumbria TV studio equipment in circuit with Network One from Television Centre in London. That's BBC One before being radiated by a main transmitter. The dependent relays would carry the opt-out automatically. So the BBC One signal from London was actually known as Network One, in a BBC context because it hadn't yet been radiated by a transmitter. It was leaving the studio centre via a leased line to the London Network Switching Centre, which would forward the signal up through Birmingham and then on to the Network Switching Centre in Manchester and for North West Tonight and Carlisle for News North West Cumbria. It should be noted that the BT Telecommunications plc network switching centres are powerful concerning regional and sub-regional opt-out arrangements. Engineers at an NSC can prevent, if need be, a region's regional news studio centre from opting out of a BBC television network transmitter, be it network 1 or network 2. That's BBC 2 before it's radiated by the relevant transmitters. The NCA TV studio at Radio Cumbria could also opt out of network 2, as I've said, by arrangement with the Carlisle Network Switching Centre if the BBC in Cumbria ever needed to. For example, if there was an important World Cup football match which needed to be shown on BBC 1 at the then 9 o'clock news time, which would have meant that the Cumbria TV sub-region would have had to opt out via network 2 at 9:25, this being the 5-minute regional and sub-regional opt-out time, because they would have moved the 9 o'clock news to BBC 2 while the World Cup match was being played. It's happened with other matches, I believe. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening to my simplified account of how the then BBC Radio Cumbria TV studio used as a sub-region opt-out studio operated. And before I say thank you for watching, I've got an image of part of a network diagram. This was through the UK IBA, ITV and 4th channel system, that's channel 4. And if I just show it up to the camera, you can possibly make out the different network switching centres in circles, plus the transmitters marked on the network diagram, which I obtained from IBA Engineering Information in the late 1980s, but it still applies now. You can get a network diagram if you're in broadcasting showing all the network switching centres and all the relevant television studios and their main transmitters that are linked to the network switching centres. Another page to it. This is the London Network Switching Centre is the biggest in the country, biggest in the UK, and that's a network diagram showing the London Network Switching Centre. But usually with the Radio Cumbria News and Current Affairs television studio opt-out known as News North West Cumbria in August 1988, it usually opted out on Network 1, which became BBC 1 from the Colbeck main transmitter. But they did have the facility to opt out on BBC 2 with the cooperation of the Carlisle Network Switching Centre. And as I say, the network switching centres are run by British Telecommunications plc for broadcast quality, sound and vision circuits, which also means for local radio studios linking the local radio studios to the transmitters, it passes through a network switching centre usually, or a BT premises with network switching capability. It may not be big enough to be designated as a network switching centre. That's the case in Liverpool, where a number of Radio Merseyside lease lines go through on their way to the various transmitters that Radio Merseyside use. And this is the URL, the Uniform Resource Locator of my YouTube channel. It's https://www.youtube.com/@Muppet71B, and it's the symbol for @ on your keyboard, an A in a partial circle. So that's about all I have time for in my brief lecture on BBC TV NCA studios. As I say, the news and current affairs studios, TV studios at local radio couldn't usually opt out of the main station because in the case of Radio Merseyside, for instance, the main station, the main TV transmitter station serving Merseyside is Winter Hill in Lancashire. It also serves Lancashire, Greater Manchester, Manchester and Cheshire and parts of North Wales. So it wouldn't have been appropriate for the Radio Merseyside NCA studio to opt out of Winter Hill, because the whole region would have seen the programme. They needed a main station for Merseyside, but that was apparently too expensive to build. I think a feasibility study was carried out by the engineer in charge at that BBC local radio station in the late 1980s, early 90s, and the official conclusion was it would be too expensive to implement. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to my brief lecture on BBC local radio news and current affairs. That's NCA TV studios. Thank you for watching. Oh, before I go, I'll have to say that I'll be speaking about something else tomorrow. So do tune in to the at Muppet 71B channel, or log in, I should say, tomorrow at 8 p.m. in the evening, when I'll be talking about something else. Thank you for watching.